Hello everyone and welcome to our session on the connected worker. In this session, we will take a look at some of the leading connected worker technologies such as augmented reality, remote monitoring, mobile technology. I'm Inderpreet Shoker. I am a senior analyst at ARC Advisory Group. I cover various asset management technologies and connected worker technologies. So we have a great session planned here today. So I'll start off with a short presentation and then we'll move on to our end user presentations, where first we'll have a presentation from the Alcoa team, and then we'll have a presentation from Chevron, Chevron's Ed Moore, and after that we'll open up for panel discussion. So these connected technologies are helping the industrial world in many different ways. They can help improve the productivity. They are helping improve the efficiency in various different areas, can also help improve the safety of workers, bring in cost savings in various different areas, and help improve the quality. But I believe one of the biggest challenge that these technologies are helping the industrial world address is tackling the skills gap in the industrial world. So it is no news for the industry that there is a widening skills gap. Boomers are retiring and few people are entering the industrial world. Of course, the industry is aware of this challenge and trying to address this challenge in various different ways. We're looking at more automation, outsourcing. Of course, we're trying to adopt a range of advanced technologies and trying to improve the training programs as well. But last year, something completely unexpected happened. The world was hit by the COVID pandemic, and of course, the whole world had to adjust to new ways of doing things. Now we are slowly adjusting to the new normal, but back a year ago, when we were talking about April, May timeframe, the whole world was just completely shut down. And this created a new kind of skills gap that the industrial world faced. Fewer workers were allowed at plants, people couldn't travel at all. So companies, that's what we saw, that all those companies that had invested in connected worker technologies way before the pandemic hit, all those companies were able to adjust better to the new normal conditions. A number of leading technologies are helping address the skills gap in the industry. And for the most part, many of these technologies actually come together to form a solution for a user. Basically, these technologies enable one another. Today, we'll take a closer look at some of these technologies such as augmented reality, mobile technologies, and remote monitoring. One technology that has brought great improvement is mobile technology. Well, mobility is a broad topic with a range of applications for connecting people, equipment, and information. And this is affecting the entire enterprise actually. We are able to connect local assets. We are now connecting remote assets. We're connecting mobile assets. But one of the major area of application has been on connecting remote workers. Of course, with the help of mobile technology, the workers are connected to their colleagues, but they can also be connected to a range of their enterprise applications. And this way they can get access to a wide range of relevant data to help them perform the jobs quickly and more efficiently. These technologies are also helping them capture data better. Because a lot of times we hear from end users that they are maintaining paper-based records. And the problem with these records is that sometimes the data is not recorded properly, or often these records are lost. So if the field workers have digital tools, such as mobile devices, tablets, then they can use these to update records right away when they perform a task. And this ensures that the records are not lost. So this just simplifies the process for field workers as well. Remote monitoring has garnered a lot of attention in recent times with the advent of Industry 4.0 and Industry IIoT. So it's often used for asset management applications where end users are sharing equipment data with manufacturers and third-party service providers. But we are seeing that a lot of companies are using remote monitoring internally as well. Subject matter experts are limited in number, and it's not possible to have SMEs at each and every plant. So many companies, if they have if they have multiple plants, operations in multiple locations, they are establishing a central monitoring location where they get data from multiple plants and where the subject matter expert sits and they are able to monitor all these different assets. Again, we are hearing that all those companies that were investing in remote monitoring technologies way before the pandemic hit, they were greatly able to adjust to the COVID-19 disruptions. Next, I want to talk about augmented reality a little bit. In AR applications, users' view is taken up by real field of view as well as digital content. So this can be done with a range of hardware. Smart glasses are becoming popular for this. We have a lot of applications for smartphones and tablet as well. And as we move on to advanced AR, which is often called mixed reality, where one is also able to interact with the digital content with hand gestures, then we have hardware such as Microsoft's HoloLens. So this technology started as airplane heads-up display, so that airplane pilots, they don't have to look down to get relevant data, so that they have their relevant data right in their field of view. That's how this technology started. But of course, we have seen it various different places. We see this technology being used in sports. And the application that made AR term extremely popular was Pokemon Go. And then, of course, we have advanced hardware available these days, such as HoloLens, where you can interact with the data with your hand gestures, pinch grip, and so on. In the industrial world, the biggest application area that we see for augmented reality is augmented collaboration, where your workers in the field or whenever it's needed, they are able to connect with a remote expert. But along with the audio communication, along with the video communication, they can also do augmented communication. So they have access to augmented tools such as they can annotate, they can mark, they can tag stuff. So basically, the remote expert is able to guide the field worker better with the AR application. We also see AR application for training and for operations as well. But so far, this has been the biggest application area, augmented collaboration. So the connected technologies are helping the users in many different ways. But one thing that they're doing is that they are empowering the subject matter experts, and they're also helping digitize the subject matter expertise. It helps with the communication, it reduces the complexity, and these technologies are helping capture the tribal knowledge as well. With AR application, you can improve the collaboration, and with remote monitoring, you are able to empower your subject matter expert to be able to take care of more assets, for assets that have spread out in different parts of the world. And together, these are also helping reduce the complexity by offering relevant information, relevant data when they need it. Remote workers, they need the data in the field when they are doing a job. They need to communicate to a remote subject matter expert. They can do that. Subject matter expert can sit in one location and help manage the asset in various different locations. So that's what these connected technologies are helping us do. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention. And next, we'll dive more into the details and listen to some use cases from end users. First, we have Johann Reps and Guilherme Soares from Alcoa with their presentation on connected worker and driving operational excellence.
Hi everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Johann Reps, and I lead the Connected Worker Automation and Robotics New Technologies and Innovation Programs for Alcoa globally as a member of the Digital Transformation for Operations Group based in Perth, Australia. I'm joined today by Guilherme Soares, who is my counterpart on the information technology and automation solutions, providing critical infrastructure to deliver our connected worker program. Before launching into the main topic of this presentation, I'd like to give a brief overview of Alcoa and its operations, if nothing else, to paint a picture of some of the challenges we've faced in our journey. Alcoa has three operating segments, fully integrated in the aluminium value chain, in bauxite mining, alumina refining, and aluminium smelting, along with assets in energy generation throughout the globe. Our global footprint includes 25 manufacturing facilities worldwide and approximately 14,000 employees. We have ownership in 7 active bauxite mines globally and operate 4 of them. With an installed refinery capacity of 17 million metric tons per year, we currently operate 6 refineries in Australia, Brazil, and Spain, and have a 25% share in a refinery in Saudi Arabia. Our 3 refinery operation in Western Australia is the world's biggest single source of alumina, able to supply approximately 7% of the global market. Now, it's important to note here that with such a global footprint, our operating locations are bound to have different organizational structures, different cultures, different work execution practices, and different system of records. All these constitute substantial barriers when trying to develop a uniform and integrated connected worker solution for all global workers. Now, why connected worker and why now? Well, first, Alcoa has been an employer of choice for many years, and while that drives substantial benefits through minimal attrition, it comes with a price. This price is that between 2021 and 2026, approximately 20% of our operating workforce, made up of long-standing employees, will retire, with no practical, efficient, or engaging mechanism to capture their knowledge and transfer it to new recruits. Second, there's been a general lack of digital adoption across the business units, other than for maintenance and process data systems of records. While these were enough in the past, more data and more insight is now required for our employees to make the best decisions they can. Third, while the underlying fundamentals of our system of records were adequate, their user experience wasn't, and that would quite often drive a number of activities being carried out on paper with no ability to generate insight or drive interoperability. The ultimate impact from a business KPI point of view is lower than expected productivity and tool time. With this comes also difficulties to review and assess work execution against best practice and monitor improvement or degradation over time. And finally, there was a general recognition that providing actionable, fit-for-role and real-time information was essential for us to accelerate the delivery of production records and continue to grow our operating margins. From a value proposition standpoint, our Connected Worker program has 2 aspects. The first one is a general tool time increase for shop floor employees of approximately 15%. And the second one is locking in organizational knowledge. The first component is achieved through the complete removal of the need for a shop floor employee, a supervisor, a superintendent, or a manager to be at their desks at any point in time during the day. From the moment they leave the crib room in the morning, we can assume that they'll continue to receive relevant information or instructions to perform their job, and they'll be able to make decisions on the fly without the need to interrogate a variety of systems. The second piece around locking in organizational knowledge comes down to a deep analysis of our workflows and practices, which ultimately influences our build or buy strategy for connected worker components. And what I mean by that is, do our document management processes bring a particular value to Alcoa? No, not particularly, and we should leverage what's in the market. Do our maintenance planning and execution practices bring us an edge over our competitors? Absolutely. And every cent of our roughly $1 billion maintenance budget is spent through rigorous workflows. For that reason, in some instances, we'll need to develop custom web and mobile apps, custom APIs, and custom workflows to ensure that the way we do the work, who is involved in the decision making, what data is made available to who and when, all of that is hard-coded in our solutions to achieve our target state. And while following the target state was optional in the past, it's now the only option through our digital guided tools and workflows. So all our standards on how to raise a work order, right, as an example, which default operation to assign, what resources to book, how many parts to order, what flag to turn on or off in our EBS solution to ensure that planning is optimized. All of this is taken care of in the background to ensure that a work order creation activity that used to take between 10 and 30 minutes, depending on the user, could now be done in 30 seconds by anybody around the world. Now, we have the scope, but we needed to define the boundaries and probably more importantly, what to target to ensure that our group would be successful by making an immediate difference to the lives of our employees. We're lucky to have a long-standing relationship with Tata Consultancy Services and decided to partner with them for the development of a number of the solutions you'll see in a second. Integral to this program was also our internal information technology and automation solutions group responsible for providing the foundational elements necessary for this program. And I'll leave it to Guilherme to go into more details on this topic in a few slides and talk to you about what was done under his leadership to really support our program. Now, we did numerous Gemba walks. We mapped out every activity performed during the day by all levels of the organization, from shop floor employees to plant managers. We identified the key tasks that needed immediate attention from a digital standpoint. And as you can see here, we're targeting, field inspections, permits to work, equipment isolation, augmented reality, training methods, and what was a large part of our program in 2020, our ultimate mobile worker solution, which targets the largest number of users in our global workforce. Well, our mobile worker solution is targeting all roles of the organization, from maintainers, operators, environmental scientists to impoundment inspector. Our recent focus was on the full life cycle of maintenance work execution. For those of you not familiar with it, it effectively starts with the identification and creation of work outside of standard planned maintenance, raised in a system of record following very specific standards. Users are then required to find the necessary parts to perform the activity available through asset bill of materials, asset activity bill of materials, supplier catalogs, etc. They then need an ability to efficiently order these parts and, if necessary, borrow them from another operating location nearby. Following this, a separate team of experts need to raise the appropriate permit to work and isolate the relevant equipment before signaling that the equipment is ready to be maintained. And now a team of maintenance experts is assigned the work based on a variety of priorities and skill sets required. And they follow a detailed work list, including job steps and tasks, and they carry out necessary inspections. Finally, the outcome of the work, for example, resource utilization, quality plans, operation completion, is carried out to ensure that our maintenance system of record holds all the necessary information to perform future data mining and analytics on our adherence to the target state. Our mobile worker solution interfaces with all these components and ensure that our users have a seamless experience, requiring no training to follow Alcoa standards while going through this workflow. The approach we took to deliver this solution, amongst many, was quite a contrast compared to previous waterfall approaches that were prevalent in the business. During the initial development cycle, we utilized an end-to-end agile Scrum methodology with Scrum Masters, product owners, value leaders, UX designers, and testing team with various representatives from our operations and functions. Following the deployment of the minimum viable product, we ensured that we had very rapid iteration of enhancements in 2 to 3 week cycles. When we moved to our deployment phase, arguably the most complex in a project of this magnitude, we did 2 things. One, we set up a global and regional governance models with operations, digital, and IT resources to ensure that we had regular touch point with our operations, ultimately our customers, during the deployment, and look back into the development team for rapid product adjustment. And 2, we moved to a Kanban methodology to remove the reliance on a sprint duration. And that ensured that we had and continue to have the ability to resolve bugs and deploy enhancements in days, sometimes doing deployments multiple times a week. This coincided with the implementation of a dedicated support model with TCS resources, specialized in our solutions and with a very good understanding of the intent of our solutions rather than only a technical understanding. And I'll touch on this in a second. Now, below here, you can actually see actual screenshots of our solutions in production. On the bottom 3 here are a variety of applications that all talk to each other and provide that seamless user experience that we talked about. And it's important to highlight that we also focused our efforts on developing web applications with the exact same workflow and user experience as our mobile apps. The reason behind this is that we still have a number of critical roles that are based in plant offices, such as our control attendants monitoring the health of our refineries 24/7, valuing an interaction with the desktop far more than with the mobile. And if we have the luxury to utilize more real estate to provide insight to our workers, we definitely do it. So more often than not, we will always try to develop a web equivalent of our mobile applications. It's important to start our summary of lessons learned and benefits with the fact that 2020 was dedicated to the development and organic adoption by early adopters. Users would elect to use our solutions, and while our communication on availability and new features was formal and regular, there was no enforcement or mandate to use any of our applications. This strategy worked very well, and the number of adopters grew on a weekly basis throughout the lifecycle development to reach a point where we are now with a very strong customer base and a formalized deployment strategy across the globe. Now, from a benefit standpoint, and based on what has been reported to date, we've hit a number of important business KPIs and will continue to do so over the coming months and years. The first one is a 40-minute to 1 hour a day saved for some of our users across multiple functions that have reported a complete removal of some of the mundane and non-value-add tasks that they had to do in their daily activities and workflows, and also a substantial reduction in time required to perform other activities. We've also seen an increase in planned work complete ratio with a correlated reduction in unplanned work. Now, when you know that industry standards indicate that unplanned work is approximately 4 times more costly than planned work, you can start calculating substantial benefits. We've also seen a better quality handover between our shifts, and that ultimately leads to an increase in tool time as our workers don't waste time running around trying to figure out what the previous crew actually worked on or what challenges they faced. And finally, we've unlocked the ability to better visualize and control the execution of critical maintenance work across our plants. Now, with regards to lessons learned, the biggest one would have to be that Agile is not an excuse to not plan or provide an incomplete scope of work. It's crucial to have in mind some form of end game with milestones to validate progress. And it's important that everybody in the development team, from the Scrum Master to the product owner to every single designer, actually work under the same assumptions towards the same goal. Engagement with end users is critical for success and buying, from the time you start writing user stories to the time the products start going out into production. The law of diffusion of innovation applies here more than ever, so it's important to pick out a good representation of the future end users. We've also found that engaging with developers and making them an integral part of the team is critical, irrespective of how many they are on a single product. We need to ensure that they understand the process, the outcome, and more importantly, the intent of a solution before talking technical. There's a lot of different ways to develop a mobile or web app, but I think that there's only a few that will deliver the outcome that the business is seeking. And finally, network performance. It matters so much. While all our connected worker solutions are in Azure, we've had to give proper consideration to the setup of our regional instances and connection to on-prem infrastructure to make sure that our operations in the middle of the Amazon could utilize our apps with the same speed and user experience as users in Australian offices. And that is all for me. So thank you for your attention. I'll now hand it over to Guilherme so he can take you through some of the magic that happened behind the scenes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Guilherme, and I'll be talking in more detail about the ITPs of the connected worker applications. The slide you are seeing now shows the ecosystem of the connected worker program from a system point of view, and also the main functions and interactions they have between each other. Now, if you take a look more underneath in the bottom, being highlighted now, you are gonna see the IIoT foundational elements that we've needed to put in place in order to support the development and deployment of the portfolio of connected worker solutions. And that is what I will talk about in the next slide. So a couple of years ago, when Alcoa started in the digital transformation journey, and the IIoT department was invited to be part of this exciting journey, we knew that the challenge that we had ahead was really a tough one. That's why we decided to put together a fantastic team with superpowers to implement what we were planning to do. And by that time, we called that team as the Fantastic Four, because of, similarly to the movie, we're being transported to an alternate universe called cloud computing and also the mobile development. What he did was to build 4 elements to pave the road and support the development and deployment of the solutions. So the first element that we've put in place was the agile project management. Reason why we called the Mr. Fantastic, to help us leading the change we're about to do. So what happened is, traditionally, the way that we've developed any IT project in Alcoa was based on the waterfall model, and therefore, to implement the new agile methodology was really a big step change in our process. So firstly, what we did was, because of the project team that was located in 3 different regions, so Australia, India, and US. So can you imagine how hard it would be conducting daily stand-up meetings in a virtual teams with 3 different time zones? So secondly, the solutions had different product owners with, of course, different priorities. So we needed to have a very strong backlog management in place to ensure the expectation will be met. After that, we needed to call out the human torch. The reason for that is because we needed to put on fire our existing software development framework. So in that front, we moved from the existing monolithic to microservices architecture, breaking down the systems into a collection of smaller independent units and enabling them to run faster and secured as well, sharing service components where applicable. So we also worked on the mobile development front. So on that front, what it did was we incorporated mobile development practice and framework to expedite the process of developing mobile applications, and also created a brand new mobile device management toolset by using tools like AirWatch to manage our applications rollout and others. Thirdly, we asked help to the invisible woman, not only because her special superpower of becoming invisible, but also because of the abilities to project force fields and mainly to control and manipulate objects. So that's why we implemented all the connected worker applications using Azure cloud environments. By using Azure cloud, we can easily and quickly deploy our applications around the globe in an automated way by using DevOps, CI/CD pipeline. So that's what it did on that front. Also, the huge number of Azure components that can be promptly spinned up make the development work more agile and provide us different flavors for resolving business needs by implementing different components in our development, in the development of our applications. Last but not least, we have the thing. And we call the systems integration as a thing because part of the whole connected worker solution were in a different and distinguished ways of system integration. And that's because of two aspects. That's why we called the thing. First, because there were several numbers of disparate systems that needed to be integrated in order to deliver the right information in a timely manner to the workforce so they can do their work near to the workplace without disruption on the workflow process. We delivered our systems integration strategy by putting in place an API culture via the API management, of course, because we were using by that time the Azure cloud. That means that every system is a potential data source, and those systems which already have an API implemented will be easily connected to our connected worker applications by using APIM. And that strategy allow us to move faster into these deployment and connections of different legacy applications and applications that we are still supporting to the new connected worker applications. Second, because there is still a bunch of, as I said, legacy systems that either not having any way to extract data out, or the mechanism is so old-fashioned that becomes almost impossible to pull the data out of the systems. And to achieve success on that, what it did was we started to deploy integrations via the Azure Data Factory and integration runtimes on-premise. So for those systems where the back end was hard to connect, so a simple data extraction via file could meet the requirements and do the integration with our connected worker applications. So that's why we did all the legacy systems integration by using Azure Data Factory as well as integration runtimes for those that runs on-prem. Of course, system integration is still a work in progress, but I would say that we achieve a lot of success implement both initiatives that I have just mentioned to you. Having said all that, I can summarize that from a technology point of view, all the work that we have done so far or we are still doing in the connected workspace in Alcoa is yet to be completed. However, the solid ground has already been put in place and paved the road, and now beautiful cars are transiting, delivering the expected benefits, adding the value to the business. And that's why I'd like to present as part of the technology part of the connected worker applications in Alcoa. So thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent presentation, guys. You guys did a great job with the presentation and quite impressive work you guys are doing at Alcoa. Next up, we have Ed Moore. He's with Chevron, and he'll talk a little more about augmented reality and how they are adopting that technology. Ed, all yours.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. Is that visible?
Yes, Ed.
Okay, great. All right, I'll take that as a yes. So my name is Ed Moore. I'm a senior technology strategist with Chevron, focusing in the OT and connected worker space. I've been with Chevron about 12 years. Been in the industry, working in companies, AspenTech and Schlumberger in previous parts. So what we're going to really go through today is really talking about how Chevron has brought AR into our operational space. This is something we actually started back in 2016 when the kind of the first AR technology that we felt was true AR, and I'll speak to that in a moment, came into existence. And then we'll talk very specifically about three specific capabilities. One is what's Remote Expert, which most people probably are familiar with. What we call full-scale model review, where we take our 3D models from AutoCAD, bring those to full scale, and put them out in the field and actually verify them for fit, walk through other aspects before we cut any steel. And then lastly, augmented work instructions, where we can actually create work instructions to walk people through more complex procedures that are maybe not done on a daily basis to ensure that they're done properly. So before we get into those, I do want to kind of baseline everybody around what is VR versus AR. I don't know how familiar everybody is with that, so it's always good to do that. So I think most people would understand what virtual reality is. That is, if you've seen the movie The Matrix, that's the greatest example of its VR. So you're basically taking us and putting us into a fully virtual or simulated environment. There's really no awareness of your physical world any longer at this point, and you're focused really just kind of on being in that digital world. That VR space is really powerful for training. There's some great companies out there that have done actually quite a bit of human factor engineering studies around it. And what they found is that the memories you developed in VR are really indistinguishable from memories you've developed in real life. So, you know, I still, one of the first VR experiences I saw was actually a drill rig on the North Slope, and I still have very strong memories of what that rig looked like, where things existed. So it's really great for VR, for training purposes. It just really kind of reinforces and ensures. Some training companies do some fairly extreme things. They'll actually they've hooked people up and they will actually shock them if they touch something that might be energized, and then that creates a very strong memory. So you can do some fairly sophisticated things that will actually leverage our senses to reinforce certain behaviors. And so we don't do that, but that is something I've heard other spaces doing. And so on the other world, or other aspect of this, is really augmented reality. And again, this is a continuum, I would say, is really where you're in the physical world, you're fully aware of your physical environment, and you're bringing in digital data and you're overlaying it. And so you can kind of see a couple of examples there in the middle. One is basically using a technology called Remote Assist, where you're actually interacting and the person in the office is drawing in your physical world. And that's in a three-dimensional drawing space. So it's actually very powerful. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the other one is really with showing an AutoCAD file of some of our lifeboats off of one of our offshore platforms, and basically being able to look at that and kind of walk around that. So again, this AR and what we consider as true AR really immerses and makes it look like there is a three-dimensional thing in your environment. And it's really mixed reality. It's another term people will hear. That's really the continuum of the whole thing from AR through VR. And you'll also hear terms like XR. And XR is just, think of X as you can place in A, V, or M. But that's kind of how people refer to the entire spectrum. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about augmented reality. And this is where I think there's some confusion on, you know, people kind of say augmented reality and they mean a multitude of different things. So, you know, augmented reality has really been around for quite a while. The military uses this in the heads-up displays. Typically it's monochromatic, but, you know, you can bring in color now, some of the technical advances. And then a lot of new cars now have these heads-up displays. So you kind of basically see, you know, maybe your directions or the speed that you're currently traveling. What's nice about that is you don't have to take your eyes off the environment. You're able to just focus, and the information kind of comes to you as it becomes available. That AR is really locked to either the physical part of the car you're driving around. So as you turn the car, it has no awareness of the space around you. It's just locked in place. Or if it's in a headset, it's basically locked in place at that point. The next type is what more people the broader world would be aware of, is what's gone on with Pokemon Go. So things like iPhone, Windows, Android. This basically uses the camera, and then it overlays a digital image on top of that. So it's not very immersive at all, but it does allow you to look at things. If you've seen Home Depot commercials, they have a great one where they're showing a desk, dropping it into a real world. And it gives you a good sense of what that piece of furniture would look like in real scale. The great thing about these technologies is this is very accessible. Pretty much everybody has a mobile phone. So from an investment perspective, a company like Home Depot can easily invest in something like that. As you move away, and that is fairly immersive, but not what I would consider truly augmented reality. Now, as we move into more displays, you look at something like a monocular micro display. This is really like holding up your phone. And typically, these displays, I'm not aware of any that are really using the AR capabilities that you have in an iPhone or a tablet. It's really just displaying data in your field of view. One of the negatives of that is actually does kind of block your field of view, but it's really no different than holding your phone about 7 inches away from your eyes. They do some special things there to allow you to focus on that. But again, it's really just providing kind of a screen, a hands-free screen for you. As you move into some of the transparent displays like Google Glass or Epson, depending if it's monocular or binocular, that technology is about overlaying and allowing you still to see your environment, trying not to obscure your environment, but again, just kind of overlaying information in that. So that's really where Google Glass provided that technology and kind of made that more broadly aware. The technology that we really have bought into and we feel is kind of the future and kind of the strongest one that really take away majority of these other technologies and leave them kind of on the technology sideline is what's considered waveguide display technology. And what this technology does is it actually it uses a clear display, so it doesn't obscure your view. It gives you a binocular view of it. It's actually creating 3-dimensional depth. And it's also, most of these devices actually have some type of, best way to think about it is LiDAR scanners. They basically actually do depth and mapping of the actual environment you're in. So that gives them the ability to put things in the real environment and have the real environment actually affect those things. So I'll talk a little bit about more of that in a little bit. But the best examples of that are Microsoft and Magic Leap. Magic Leap's an interesting story if you haven't heard of them. They were a startup. They have a valuation like $4.5 billion, or at least they did. They're not doing very well right now, but they were like the highest valued company that actually had never put a product out before they released what you consider there the tethered AR goggles there. And then Microsoft has obviously done a lot here. We expect companies like Apple to come into the space, keep hearing about those devices coming out here in the next couple of years, but we'll wait on that. Okay, so for Chevron, we really got into this technology in 2016. And then in 2017, we started doing some pilots, but we really didn't get into full deployment until 2018. There's a lot of things you have to do to really go to scale. What this diagram shows here is this is really a pie chart of all our business units. I actually have a version of this that shows the actual business units, which I took off for this presentation. But this basically shows the count or the number of HoloLenses we actually had deployed back in 2018. These would be V1 devices. And our really objective back then was to really get the technology in the hands of the business units. We had a couple of business units you can see here that really wanted to use more of them and really adopt the technology more broadly. But we actually funded that and drove that technology adoption centrally. As we moved into the V2 devices, those devices basically, the business units now, based upon kind of this early adoption, are actually purchasing all those devices. We have them purchase them no different than they purchase laptops and or iPhones. So again, we have some business units that have actually bought into the technology quite heavily and are using it quite extensively. These are both hard hat mounted displays. This one's actually built a little bit more. This actually flips up, so there's a lot of capabilities here. A lot of technology in here. These cameras are the ones that are actually doing the world mapping, and that actually creates a 3D mesh model of your environment as you walk around. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but just kind of wanted to give. So this is real stuff. Chevron has right around 160 of V1 devices and coming up on 200 V2 devices deployed out in our business units. So let's talk about the actual capability. What's really the benefit to the worker? So what we're going to talk about initially is remote assist. So this is really, there's 6 scenarios that we've identified and really targeted for this. The great thing about this business capability is it doesn't require any work prior. You basically just need a Wi-Fi connection, you need the device, and then you can deploy. A lot of the other scenarios, you actually have to have a CAD file. You have to do maybe some manipulation of that CAD file. So this is very easy to deploy. So the biggest, most obvious one is the remote expert. I'm having a problem in the field. I need to call back to the office. In the past, we typically fly somebody out to a site. Now we can basically kind of virtually transport them. We have remote inspection and auditing. This is something we've actually, when COVID hit, it's kind of went from being kind of a nice to have that had saved us money to a requirement. We actually had many field locations where we couldn't travel. We couldn't go and inspect the things that were being built for us. So what we actually did early last year in 2020 is we went through the activity of creating a version of the device that was in kiosk mode, so it was very locked down, and we shipped that through the mail to the vendor. The vendor would power it up, type in a PIN, and call us back, and then we would inspect the things virtually there. So that was a really key capability that we enabled over about a couple of months, where always in the past, we at least had one Chevron person going with the device. Field work, being able to have a field worker call back into an operations center, engineering, be able to look at equipment that's actually in the field, and they might be remotely in a faraway location or not in the plant or the facility. Some of our facilities are distributed across hundreds of miles. Factory acceptance tests, again, something we used quite heavily here recently. And then the vendor facility audits. We actually have done this where we will audit vendor sites with the technology. So instead of now having to send, half a dozen people, we would actually just simply go through and send one person, and that person would kind of become our drone almost to some degree, and walk around and allow the people in the office to work. So when you talk about it from a business value, which is really why we do this, so travel costs is really the most important thing for us. It's 1 to 3 days typically in travel that would take, depending on where we're going. You got things like business airfare, hotel food, cab, and then on some scenarios, especially for offshore platforms, we had helicopter flights. So, that money added up very quickly. The time for those experts to be there, a lot of times we would have experts travel a day or so to get to a site. They'd get there, they'd solve the problem in an hour, they'd turn around and come home. So if you looked at it from a percentage of his time actually working the problem versus traveling, we were able to take these experts and basically get a lot more productivity out of them. And then the last one is really time to problem resolution. So a lot of times things would break, and we could fix them within hours versus having to schedule somebody to go, in some scenarios offshore, we might not have bed space for them. So a lot of value there to getting things resolved more quickly. And then obviously some of the soft benefits, safety, if you're not traveling, that's a huge risk that you eliminate from that perspective, work-life balance, and we can leverage retired experts. So we have scenarios where people are retired, they can come back in and work part-time and leverage their expertise there. So when we talk about unique capabilities, so you might be thinking, okay, hey, I can do this with a Teams call or a Skype call or a FaceTime call, and that is absolutely true. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the unique capabilities that these devices actually provide, and true AR devices provide, and really what we want to provide, right? So one of the things is that it creates a true 3D understanding of the field worker's environment. So as you're out there, it's actually using these cameras, and it actually creates equivalent of a LiDAR scan of the environment, not as precise as LiDAR would be, but it creates that mesh model, that point cloud. And by having that, when you're the expert in the office and you actually click on something, it understands the depth and it puts the arrows or the drawings directly on that device. If the field worker then walks around to the back side of it, that arrow that they're pointing at is locked in space. The arrow doesn't move. It's not relative to where the person's walking. it's actually tied to that piece of equipment. And that's all done automatically. Obviously, being able to see and hear the experts. One of the things we were really excited about with the V2 devices is they actually used, the hard hat versions, actually used a bone induction headset. And what this allowed us to do is actually use in-ear as well as over-ear hearing. And the bone induction headset connected Bluetooth to the device, and it would allow us to actually hear with that full hearing protection on. We basically used the vibrations from these little sensors that would touch the back of your skull that was connected to the hard hat. Obviously, taking pictures and recording, that's full integration in with Teams. That's a huge benefit, and one of the reasons we really like the Microsoft technology in that scenario is we didn't have to deploy any infrastructure for this. It just worked. Uploading images and PDF documents. So this was unique for the technology. So a field worker can actually go out into the field and he can bring up documents and have them kind of floating virtually around him. And they're extremely readable. I think we actually did one test at one point and got down to 7 font size that we could read easily. So, you know, I can bring up the schematics, I can pull up work instructions and just put them and have them floating right around me. And they get locked in space, so I don't have to, as I move around, they just stay where I need them to stay. Obviously, full integration with desktop and OneDrive. Integration into the whole Microsoft ecosystem. This was important from an IT perspective, security-wise. These devices had TPM chips, and that's important as you start integrating any of these technologies in. This is one of the challenges we actually had with Magic Leap, is they just really had none of this even thought about. And so with the technologies we use, that was fully integrated and just worked out of the box. So, well, it worked after we worked with them quite a bit on it. And so the other thing there is full device management. When we actually started with these devices, we used a product called AirWatch to manage the devices, because we want to be able to wipe them just like we do our phones. And those devices that worked perfectly for us. And then as we moved into the V2s, we actually integrated it with our Intune environment, which is a competing product. As we moved over to that for all our cell phones, we migrated these devices as well. And that just worked exceptionally well. So we have full ability to wipe, control, monitor these devices at any point. Another nice thing is I can actually share my desktop application. So just like I can have a static screen of a diagram, I can also have a live view of the expert's desktop. So let's say he's using an engineering application, he can actually share the view of that engineering application, and it's like having a monitor floating there in front of you, and the field worker can actually view and see what the expert's pointing to and interacting with. With these remote assist applications, I have the ability to also run other applications at the same time. So whether I need to look at operational data, I can do that through an Edge browser. I can visualize other 3D applications, and then I can also run things like our full-scale model review scenarios. Now, I spoke briefly about the personal protection. So in the energy industry, C1D2 is important. We don't have C1D1 certification, but the majority of our facilities are strictly C1D2. So that's worked well. Z87 for impact resistance, and then the bone induction headset I spoke about. There are non-hard hat versions. So if you do have office scenarios or areas where you don't require a hard hat, that's actually a much more comfortable device. And so that's just a quick summary there. Okay, so let's talk about what, so that was really remote assist, providing that ability for us to transport any expert anywhere in the world quickly. The next one is what we consider, or what we call full-scale model review. And what this allows us to do is take an AutoCAD file, and we take that, and then you bring that into the device, and then walk out into the field where you're going to build things, and you actually put it at full scale. And we're talking, you know, centimeter level precision. So it's fairly precise, and you can actually see the entire engineering model built before you actually have to go and cut any steel. You can also, as you see on the right side, you can see basically a scaled down version of that if you would like. And then on the left side is a full scale view where you're actually in the field and you're able to walk around that. That's the other thing that's unique about this. You're not just looking at it, and as you move left, it moves with you. It's locked in space. It does not move. I cannot stress that enough, how powerful that is. And so as an example here, one of the business benefits we got from this right off was when they put this, this was an expansion on one of our units. They put it there, and when they were walking around looking at it, they identified that one of the support beams was sitting above or was going into a drain. And so because nothing had been built yet, they were able to just simply go into the engineering model, make the change, move the support beam over, and with minimal cost to that change. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to a video. This is a video. We just took the same model. We've done these models inside, like we'll do a third phase model review for our large scale projects. We might do those in an office room. We actually shot this video that you're going to see here in a moment. This was actually one of our lubricants packaging lines. And this was actually, we brought this up onto the top of the parking garage we have nearby. So you can see a Jeep there in the background. This is a little bit shaky. That's more of an artifact of the video. Actually, as you're walking around it, it's rock solid. It does not move whatsoever. This was actually shot on a V1 version, so the V2s are actually better. And that's actually not a real person there in the corner. So, so a couple of things there is it allows you to fully walk around. So we're actually walking around the actual on top of the thing, and I'm seeing when I have the headset on the actual packaging line. So you can walk down these areas and see, do I have enough space? Are there any conflicts or any type of pinch points, things like that? You can do that as if you had already built the equipment. So extremely powerful technology from that perspective, and actually very easy to use. We now have this set up to where we can go from a CAD file directly to a model in the device in about 20 to 25 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So lastly is the augmented work procedures. This is one that we thought we'd actually get a lot more take up initially, and I think we're still working with a couple of business units on this, but this hasn't taken off as the other two have. But it basically allows you to create these work procedures to walk you through the steps of doing any type of work process. Some of the nice things about this is these are actually integrated into back-end time study workflows, so you can actually see how long it took to execute each step. You can then do some analysis based on that. And so there's a lot of integration there of not only just helping the field worker or the worker execute a specific task, but it also lets you know how fast they're executing it and maybe if they had issues or challenges during that. So, and all of these technologies, again, are all cloud-based. So a lot of capabilities there for the work procedures. There's a lot of information on the website, so I won't drill into this too much, but there's a lot of opportunity. So I kind of want to, been talking about 22 minutes so far, so I want to talk now kind of about the future. And so, if you look at the cell phone, we're really in this first, second gen level. So if those of you that are older or old like I am, the initial cell phones were bulky and they basically just did one thing. As you move through time, the devices became much more capable. And, now with our more modern cell phones, with the iPhone that are just came out last fall, and, the Android devices that come out, periodically, these things are exceptionally powerful. And that's where we see this technology really going long term. One of the things, especially from I'd say a more industrial business, that gives us a lot of hope about the technology, especially from Microsoft, is they have signed a contract with the government to basically develop, it was a $500 million, that's with a B, device, that they're actually outfitting all the infantry with these type of devices to provide things like more situational awareness. So it's going to be replacing things like their IR headsets and their infrared headsets, and their night vision goggles, to be able to give them full visibility no matter what time of the day. So if you're interested, go Google that. Some really impressive capabilities they're doing there. So that's where we really expect the mil-spec capabilities to trickle down into the more, I'd say, normal industry environment. So that's a quick overview. I'm right about 25 minutes, so I think I was going to wrap up here and go straight to questions and answers. But we really feel this technology has moved along quite quickly.
All righty, great presentation, Ed. You went into quite detail, and it's very, very impressive what you guys are doing as well. Now, I would request all our speakers and panel members to please turn on your video cameras so that we can move on to the next section. And along with our speakers, we are joined by other industry experts for this panel discussion. We have Jesus. Jesus, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you everyone. My name is Jesus Flores. I work in Lindy, and I manage and lead the smart operations team. And among many other tasks, we look into this type of technology and support implementations. Thank you.
Glad to have you. We also have Nitin Kumar with TCS. Nitin, would you please like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Preet. Hello, everyone. My name is Nitin Kumar. I'm the head of technology for the energy and resources vertical in TCS, and also responsible for the connected worker solutions and initiative within TCS.
Great, great. We also have Eric with us. He's with Microsoft. Eric, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. Good morning. My name is Eric Kamont. I work at Microsoft on our mixed reality team. I manage our strategic partnerships here and have been on the HoloLens team since day one. So I've been along for the ride for quite some time.
All righty, great. We have a lot of questions coming up. But my first question is to you, Nitin. We hear about connected worker technologies. We heard from the mining and metal industry and oil and gas. What about some of the other industries, since you work with multiple different industries? How are other industries trying to adopt this technology?
So we have actually seen these set of technologies take off quite significantly in the last couple of years. So the Connected Worker initiative within TCS is also like 3 to 4 years old. And within that technology space, we have partnered with companies like Alcoa, for example, and a few others who have been really pioneering in this particular segment. However, we also see other industries like retail, for example. I think Ed had mentioned about Home Depot once as one of the examples. That's something that TCS does for them. And we have been doing the mixed reality work with them, for example. So retail is a good example. There have been a lot of examples within retail where these technologies have picked up. Automotive and manufacturing is the other set of technologies where we are seeing that it has picked up really, really well. One of the other segments within the industries that we work in, life sciences, for example, we see a lot of uptake of mixed reality and virtual reality in medical device and surgery related aspects, for example, and our teams are working there as well. So there are lots of examples wherein these kind of examples are there. We have worked with Rolls-Royce as well with their engines and a few other cases. But I think the best part has been, or the most uptake has been in the energy and the oil and gas industry, where we are seeing a lot of uptake of these technologies coming in.
Yeah. Same question to you, Jesus. How is your company adopting these technologies, and what kind of benefits are you seeing?
Yes, well, certainly we have been looking and adopting this type of technologies at least for 4 or no more years back. And we had different, let's call it pockets of implementations and usage. In our case, we have a very diverse footprint and operations, and as such, we have different platforms. And the adoption of those platforms really depends according to the business needs. We had done the efforts in virtual reality, very similar to what Ed presented. And in terms of the connected worker, in terms of remote experts, we also have really different type of implementations according to different specific applications. In our case, I will say still there is a lot of room for growth in those type of applications. And we have a lot of activities. One of the things, I guess, in terms of challenges that we see is obviously it's always sometimes education and adoption. not per se in the technology, but really on the side of the user comfort. And so that's one challenge. The other challenge that we see is obviously this type of technologies all need to have very high speed or well,
Yeah.
or relatively high speed type of communications, right? So some of our facilities doesn't have that. So we are working towards that. And that is one challenge. And everybody, while we accept and everybody is evident the type of benefits that this type of technology brings, like faster maintenance, faster operations, having less travel, etc. Uh, Sometimes there is not as much, um, depends on the application, the very big savings, right? That the, the logging of those productivity savings in our case sometimes is a little bit uh, complicated because there
Yeah.
is a cost associated with that. But overall, I mean, I think we have a very good footprint, and but we need to do more work.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. For many, it is a new technology, so everybody is learning. Eric, can you also help share what kind of adoption you guys are seeing and what kind of industries are adopting the connected technologies?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I would say that connected technologies is a really broad statement, right? And we saw mobile platforms, we saw augmented reality, virtual reality, and all between. And so I would say you've got a lot of industries that are picking this up. Almost all of them are doing some investment. We did a research study some years ago. This might be 2018, and out of 350 companies, 87% of them were doing something in like the mixed reality world. They were in some journey. So when you think about 87% of like these top 300 companies, you go, well, what are they doing? Where are they doing it? And so we've seen it in the places like industrial manufacturing companies. That's like an obvious low-hanging fruit. We see it a lot in the architecture engineering space. We've seen it automotive and oil and gas. Obviously, I mean, Ed's a friend, and we've been working together for quite some time. And but we also see it in insurance. We see it in finance. We see it in, insurance adjusters going out to the field. We see it in retail, changing the way not only do you shop, but how do you operate a retail environment. So yeah, I mean, even NASA has these things running around on the International Space Station, right? I mean, it's kind of like anywhere on Earth, we can do something with this technology. So whatever industry you happen to be in, you can definitely take advantage of it.
Great, great. Thanks, Eric. I see a question around security, and I guess everybody can jump on it. That when we are talking about connected technologies, we are thinking about integration of different enterprise systems. So, how do you manage that? Johann and Guilherme, do you guys want to start off?
Guilherme, I think you're better placed than me
Yeah.
to talk to this.
Can you please repeat the question?
What about cybersecurity? How are you guys managing that because we are integrating so many things together to make the connected worker solution?
Yes, so yeah, that's a really good question. So when we've implemented all the connected worker applications that we have developed and also deployed so far, one of the challenges that we faced by that time when we started was really how we are going to secure our applications that will be rolled out through, the global using the brand new Azure environment in Alcoa, right? So by the time that we have deployed or implemented the application, Alcoa has just also deployed the cloud computing.
Yeah.
So we needed to go through all of those steps from not only from the security point of view, but all the other parts and pieces that needs to be put together to combine this puzzle. In terms of security, what we really are using is the off-the-shelf Azure components that we have in place, right? As I said, for instance, one of the integrations components that we are using is the integration runtime by using the Azure Data Factory, right? So to do that, we allow the cloud solutions to connect to on-prem, but by using the integration runtime, you can ensure that all the security aspects are covered by providing also gateways, and depends on the application where we're going to use that. We also provide access to the specific users or not. We are also using, for instance, API management to make the integration and all the security aspects that comes along with the API management. So we are also put in place by using all the cryptography encrypted, and also we trying to make this layer more accessible by other applications. So we also need to do the credentials and the multi-factor. Well, for deployments, for instance, we are using AirWatch as our good friend Ed is using as well to ensure that all this, I mean, the rollout of the applications can be done in a manageable way, but also in a security way, because AirWatch as a MDM tool can deal with all of those aspects. So we are using different components. Most of them are from off the shelf from Microsoft Azure, but as I said, we are also using some other tools to make additional functionality in terms of security.
Great. Ed, would you like to share, is that a concern when you are trying to promote, augmented reality solutions within Chevron?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, security is kind of fundamental. Once we've done a POC, we start thinking about security. We actually think about that during the POC. So having technologies like the TPM, which is the Trusted Platform Module, which all our laptops had, having that in the HoloLens, having equivalent versions of that in our Android and iOS devices is kind of a requirement. So, security is critical to us. We've been on a journey to the cloud. We have a strong partnership with Microsoft on Azure that we created about 2.5 years now ago. But we're now cloud first. We're trying to move all our platforms to the cloud. We're actually now using Intune as our device management. So all our devices are managed holistically and consistently, because it's super important that, as we're streaming a video call from a site, there's all sorts of IP related information that could be visible. And so it's fundamental that is fully secure. So all that information is encrypted on device. We use BitLocker on the devices. We can wipe any device at any point in time. We control everything through credentials and certificates. So yeah, these are the HoloLenses that we use are as secure, if not more secure than our laptops that we have today. And it's kind of interesting. We were the first app or product, the HoloLens was in Intune as we moved from AirWatch, and that was more of a commercial decision. And we moved over to Intune, and then now our modern desktop is actually using many of the same profiles that we created for that technology. So yes, it's fundamental. You have to work closely with IT, your cybersecurity organizations, and be able to monitor that, and it has to fit into the platforms that you're using.
Yep. Next question is for Johann and Guilherme. For your connected worker solutions, are you using one platform or are you using multiple platforms?
So what can the person that asked the question clarify what they mean by platform?
Let me see. I think this question was anonymous. Michael. Michael,
yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you are talking about platform to connect and to run and to deploy the applications, definitely we are using just one platform, which is, as I said, the Microsoft Azure, right?
Yeah.
So we are using that environment to promote how the applications will be running, as well as connecting with each other. And yeah, so it's one platform, and that is, as Johann explained during his presentation, is rolled out across the global. And yeah.
Another question is around barriers. I think all of you can chime in on this one, that what are the biggest barrier when trying to implement new technologies in the fields, especially when it comes to connected work or augmented reality, because it completely changes the way things are done. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you guys faced?
I can I can probably answer that on behalf of Alcoa. I think one of the first steps that needs to be taken is, I guess, an assessment of whether there is best practice that exists across the organization. I think especially when you talk about global organizations, and whether you want that best practice to be replicated throughout the different segments of the business. You know, in the example of Alcoa, we had refining, mining, and smelting, and arguably they would do work in different ways. And then when you go and start digitize some of the practices, you have to ask yourself whether you're going to actually build something that's going to be different for the three segments and will continue to support different practices, or if you want to identify best practice and then roll it out. I think that's probably the first thing to do, because we've seen in the past many organizations actually just digitizing something that was done on paper and keeping it the same way, but just digital. And so you have a rubbish process to start with, and you have a rubbish process to end with, but it's just a digital one. So probably the first step, I'd say, is to identify best practice. The challenge really that comes is then how do you roll that out? And that's where we've really had to think hard about how we would develop our solutions, but more importantly, how we would deploy them and what type of structure we would put in place with representatives of what part of the business. And that's why I talk about the law of diffusion of innovation, where you really have to pick the early adopters that you want to go with and actually make sure that they're going to champion what you're going to do in the business. But I think more importantly that the people that really understand what it's like to be on the shop floor utilizing these digital tools are there to support the rollout and continue to give feedback to the development teams, so you can actually iterate it and make adjustments of the product. We've seen instances of the products being developed and then put on the shelf, and everybody walks away, and then we look back 6 months later and then wonder, well, why wasn't this adopted? We realized that the industry was doing that a lot. So I know that, and again, I'm just talking on behalf of Alcoa, we've put a lot of effort in actually focusing on deployment.
A few years ago we had a presentation where the company adopted new technology, and then 6 months later when they're going to the field and nobody is using any of the features because they haven't been trained on how to use the new technology properly. So I guess you definitely hit some of the right points. Anybody else would like to add on? What are the kind of barriers that you are seeing? Ed, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think the key thing is when you look at these new technologies, once you really get beyond the proof of concept, you really have to engage all the parties and think about that kind of scale up scenario. So, engaging, once we proved, like we did our first remote assist call using Skype for consumer just to prove out the scenario, created a simple video to show how that would work and got people excited about that. And then we had to work with Microsoft to get that integrated into, the commercial products, which ended up being Teams at the time. We had to work with all our networking groups. We had to work with our device management group. So you have to engage and try not to build like a parallel infrastructure, leverage as much infrastructure as possible. But also getting the business units to buy in, having kind of that, the champions in the business units. So we had certain business units adopt it more than others. And that was mainly due to having local champions that basically had, credibility with the people in the field, or they were field workers themselves. And, we were able to pull that out. And also just being aware of what some of the limitations are of the technology and being very open and honest about that. So, we have one facility that's about 1.5 miles from Los Angeles Airport, great weather. The device works perfectly there. We have other other locations in Kazakhstan where the temperature gets to -40, or out in Australia where the temperature gets, almost above 40, and this is in Celsius, or, 110 Fahrenheit. So in those environments, we're very clear that, we can't use these. These are not day in, day out devices. You have to use them either, in certain seasonal times, or you just have to work within the limitations. So I think that's the biggest limiting factor for us right now, is some of the environmental limits that some of these devices provide. But just engage IT early, engage the business, make them partners, and again, it's all about, we have a term inside Chevron called team of teams, which is super important. And then where we are now is we're scaling even beyond, is we now have a connected worker product line. And so kind of that, I think Alcoa spoke to this, having that whole product focused, and basically having a team responsible and accountable for basically, they're reacting almost in real time to issues and items, and helping to support that.
Yeah, yeah. Jesus, would you like to add what kind of challenges have you faced? And if you could come closer to the mic a little bit. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think one of them is really continuous adoption. I think Jonathan already referred to that. Uh, we have seen that depends on the use case. There are situations in which really the devices and the specific type of platform it needs to be used continuously. So in those cases, it's fine. But there are other situations like we have a specific type of maintenance, for instance, that doesn't happen very frequently, let's say 1-2 times per year, then if the personnel doesn't just has to use certain type of technology from time to time, there is always the risk that they are not as familiar and they could come back to, let's say, the less optimal type of practices. So continuous education is one. The other one is always have some resources. In our case, we have very limited number of resources looking into this. Couple of people for well, we are 80,000. So it's always a challenge, right? And so those will be the couple of.
Great. Anybody else would like to add? What kind of challenges they see?
I can. This is Eric.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, just like I love some of these challenges are all like legitimate challenges. I think what's also interesting too, when you talk about organizational maturity, right? So, and I think we've run into this, it depends on what industry you're in, but there's a lot of companies that see things like IoT or mixed reality and they're like, I want to get there, but they haven't solved like basic technology challenges inside their environment, and I always use this joke, like if you're still running Windows XP or Vista, it's really hard to get, you're not in the cloud. It's really hard to do IoT or connected worker or MR scenarios because you still got to blend the rest of this infrastructure.
Right.
I mean, there's the power of the cloud, which makes a lot of that easier. So there's like these general things that go, hey, you just had to be honest with your organizational self and say, hey, am I ready to take this on? No. Well, what are the things I need to do to walk through maturing ourselves as an organization? So we see that a lot. And that happens like in pockets. It could be an entire company. It could be, a department of X versus department of Y. But that, when you talk about technology that's so leading edge, not bleeding edge anymore. I mean, it's landed off the hype cycle of Gartner. But when you said it's so advanced and you go, well, how do I get there? Well, you got to have this. There's an assumption. You can't drive a Ferrari unless you have to drive a car in the first place, right? I mean, that's the same kind of analogy. But in some of the worker scenarios, you talked about like training and upskilling. It's definitely important. I mean, that's like the human factor side of this is one of the most critical components. But I always have this story. People go like mixed reality with HoloLens. Don't you think it's really hard? And I said, sure. And I was in an organization one time and they're like, let's go talk to this one particular guy. And he was like a welder and he had worked there for 25 years and he didn't like technology. He was like, if you could get past this guy, you can get past anybody. Didn't use an ATM machine, didn't use a cell phone, was like totally anti-technology. And we put HoloLens on his head and he like smiled and laughed like a 5-year-old kid because it was so advanced technology. It was like he was living out his childhood dreams watching science fiction movies. And so we had him play around with it. And he's like, oh, I can do this, no problem. And everybody was in like awe because they're like, we can't get this guy to even use a computer regularly for like work orders. And here he is going to be able to use HoloLens. And so I also come back and say, despite what we sometimes think is going to be a blocker, sometimes you just have to try it and be like, hey, I'm going to give me the hardest scenario. And if I can unpack that one, I can unpack everything else. So those were just two common experiences in addition to all the great things that the panel shared.
Yeah, I agree with you. We do see many companies kind of leapfrogging, going from one dimension to another, basically. Johann, this brings me to another point, is that mining, metal and mining industry, that it has been thought of, being slow to change. And now you guys are doing some amazing things. How was this, and others are also following the lead in the industry? What do you think?
Yeah, I think when I reflect on some of the bigger companies that are around, and I'm thinking really the sort of South 32, BHP, Rio Tinto, FMG, and the likes. Talking to my counterparts there, I think that there was a period of time where everybody was very busy working on cool stuff, for lack of a better word. but didn't really hit any business KPI. And so there was a period of probably 2 to 3 years where there was a lot of hype around doing things like holograms, and in some instances also some VR stuff that looked really, really cool, or not VR, actually AR. But then you go, okay, so what actual business problem are you solving there? And I think a lot of organizations went through that phase and actually realized that they needed to restructure some of their organizations to be able to identify these business KPIs and really hit them. And I think that's where it's important to partner with a company that understands how you work. It was a very conscious decision from us to go and partner with TCS, because we have had a relationship with them for, I don't really know, to be honest, but much longer than I've been employed by Alcoa. And we were lucky to actually already be working on other projects with employees that understood the business really well. And I mentioned that in the organization, in my presentation. You want to have people that understand what is the intent of your solution, and you don't want to talk technical necessarily to start with. You really want to work with someone that understands that this worker will have to do this activity first and this activity second, and then you start building the digital solution around it. So I guess what I see now when I look at what is happening in the mining industry is probably a shift towards that, is actually partnering with organizations that have the ability to build very rapidly a good understanding of how that particular mining company is running, and then being able to mimic their processes rather than just coming with a developer that is granted very good technically but doesn't necessarily understand the intent and the business KPI that you're trying to hit.
Absolutely. Next, I want to ask you guys, what do you think, there are still very few companies that are trying to adopt augmented reality and virtual reality. So how is the industry taking up on these technologies? Nitin, you want to start?
Yeah. So you're right. AR and VR, a lot of companies have done, and what Ed mentioned in Chevron, that's remarkable, actually. We see a lot of POTs and POCs happening currently in the AR, VR kind of a scenario. The problem statement really is scalability. How much you can scale and how mainstream it can become. Across industries, we see a lot of use cases, as Eric was also mentioning. We see use cases in life sciences, in retail, a lot of automotive and a lot of other industries. But the real challenge is coming in from a scalability perspective. That's what the idea is. And the other piece is that what we are now working on is a true integration with not only just the operational bit of AR VR, but what is the value that you can actually provide through something like an advanced analytics insight that can be driven in real time through such mechanisms. Because so far it is more about what is the real-time information you're getting, but can I not link it to my advanced analytics systems in the backend and really give that predictive insight in real time to the various field workers that are there, right? So that's the next stage. The third stage is the linkage to the enterprise applications to a large extent, so that with Teams integration, that's something that we are looking at or working on as well currently. So that's a good step forward. A lot of these systems, if they are not linked to the enterprise systems, they tend to create silos on themselves, which again causes a challenge in adoption by itself, right? So that's the other piece from an adoption perspective that we are seeing will start to happen. And the third and the last piece is that I think the diagram was very, very telling, where we had the mobile phones to the Android phones currently. It's also about how quickly and how far the technology can spread, right? So the devices now are becoming intelligent, smaller, lighter, and that is going to be another step forward in the overall adoption as we see fit going forward.
Yeah. Ed, Chevron is way ahead in the journey, I believe, and you guys, started quite a few years ago now. And what do you think? Are the other industry players also adopting? Do you see that?
We do. I mean, we get a lot of kind of questions. People come to us, how did you do this? How did you scale it? And we share that with them, because for us, the more it gets adopted, hopefully the more investment Microsoft puts into it, and ultimately we get to, I want my little glasses here to be AR glasses, right? And so that's why we spend the time to help drive the technology forward. Because if you look at, is that what our field workers would want? Yes, that's what they would want. What are the limiting factors now? Weight, connectivity, temperature extremes, things like that. So we want these technologies to get to the point to where, my phone today is basically a piece of glass with information on it, right? But we want to move away from the big, shoebox size cell phones. I mean, we're way beyond that. I think we're kind of more in the BlackBerry range right now.
All righty. Well, thank you guys for all your time today. It was a great panel discussion, and you guys also did a great job answering all the questions, by typing to the attendees. Thank you so much. Really impressed. I really appreciate your time, all the information that you shared with us today. I think it's going to be extremely helpful to all the attendees. Many of them are on their own digital transformation, connected worker journey. So thank you all of you for joining. Thank you all the attendees for joining. Please enjoy the rest of the forum, and don't forget to rate the session. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.